welcome back to MFA Writers. I hope you all are enjoying the fall weather, and if you're a student or teacher, I hope you're settling into the new school year well. These early weeks of the semester are often quite hectic, so I just wanted to remind you all to take care of yourselves. Stay healthy and happy, and your writing will no doubt be better because of it. We've got a re-release today of one of my favorite conversations from a couple years ago. I hope you enjoy it. We'll be back in a couple weeks with an all-new episode. Until then, you can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Max Delsohn. Max is a third-year MFA candidate in fiction at Syracuse University. His writing appears in McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Vice, Joyland, The Rumpus, Passages North, Nat Brute, and the essay anthology Critical Hits, Writers Playing Video Games, edited by J. Robert Lennon and Carmen Maria Machado, among other places. He has been awarded fellowships and residencies from the Saltonstall Foundation for the Arts, Mineral School, and Hugo House, and has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize 3 times. His debut short story collection, Crawl, is forthcoming in fall 2025 from Grey Wolf Press. Today, Max has brought an excerpt from a short story to read for us.
Thank you so much, Jared. I'm really excited to be here. I am going to read the beginning of a short story that will be in my collection, Crawl. The story is called Moon Over Denny Blaine. People called it a beach, but it wasn't. People called it paradise, but baby, it wasn't. It was a public park shoved against a lake. 3 levels: green grass, yellow grass, and dirty dirt sand. Most people sat on the yellow grass because there wasn't much space on the sand. If you wanted to sit on the sand, you'd have to claim a spot in the morning. And most of us were showing up after morning shifts or before night shifts. Most of us were descending on the so-called beach at 3 p.m. and not a minute sooner. It wasn't the kind of place you rushed to, Denny Blaine. To the left of the concrete stairs on the yellow grass by the bush with the wasp's nest, that was our spot. To the left of that was the bush without the wasp's nest, where people would pee sometimes, although we usually just peed in the water. It was a talked-about thing, peeing in the water. The city wouldn't give us a porta-potty, even though the real beaches had them. We suspected this was the fault of the mansions on either side of the park. Once someone called the cops on us for swimming too close to their, quote, backyard. And another time, I saw a woman with mean, bird-like features snarl at us from an upstairs window. The cops showed up that time, too. We didn't assume it coincidence. Denny Blaine was, functionally, a nude beach. There are no laws against being naked in the city of Seattle. You just can't indecently expose yourself, make it sexual, and the only beachgoers you could accuse of that were the old straight guys who showed up, the ones who walked around with semis and struck up conversations with topless femmes who tried to hide their faces in their copies of Pleasure Activism or The Argonauts. Before those straight guys started showing up, The beach was affectionately referred to as Daikiki. Only a few of us still called it that. Most of the folks showing up at Denny Blaine were queer, but there were more and more straight people showing up every day. It was a problem. The park was a shithole, yes, but it was our shithole. We had to protect it. There was real pride in bringing a new queer to Denny Blaine. You'd wade naked in the blank blue water, chug warm cans of PBR, and ignore the Bellevue skyline for that wholly hallucinatory vision of Mount Rainier. You'd tell them, hey, this isn't a safe space. This isn't everything we deserve. This doesn't even have a bathroom you can use. But it's something. Something the gay bars with their cover charges and their corporate-backed drag shows can't give us. We can all just be here together. We can all finally be alone. The most crowded, batshit day to go to Denny Blaine was Pride Sunday. I'd argue it was also the best day of the year to go to Denny Blaine because that day, more than any other, it attracted a particular kind of queer. A queer with zero interest in attending the sponsored festivities at the Seattle Center. A queer who was probably hungover and half asleep from dancing at Slip till 6 a.m. A queer who cared enough to do something in proper spirit of the holiday. Who wanted to be with their people in spite of the straight, the rich, and the cops. It was one such Pride Sunday when Denny Blaine Park met its full potential, by which I mean it was one such Pride Sunday that we drove the breeders out. There were only 3 of us in my old Subaru that day, Mikey and me up front, his new girlfriend Christine in the back. It had only been a month, but Christine and Mike had spent near every day together since he'd gone into Joe Bar, written his number on a receipt, and pushed it into her hands. She's gonna make an honest man out of me, Mikey said after they fucked for the first time. The next week, he posted a picture of Christine eating pancakes at Beth's Diner with the caption, "Stop me before I marry this bitch." As we turned on to Lake Washington Drive, I saw Mikey hook his hand behind the passenger seat to reach for Christine's knee. I watched in the rear view as she felt him there, then smiled and rolled down the window. The wind caught her thick brown hair, pushing past her head like a dark flag. "Turn up the music," she said, and Charlie XCX wailed, "I just want to go back to 1999. We twisted and turned our way through the fir trees. There was something different about the trees on the route to Denny Blaine, a jumble of light and leaves so dense that the city behind you seemed to disappear. Joggers and bikers merged onto the sidewalk through brief gaps in the forest, and strange wooden stairs twisted up through the surrounding hills. The getting to Denny Blaine was part of the Denny Blaine experience. That extreme descent through the trees was a psychological reset, meant to strip away the concerns of the heterosexist world we all suffered through to make a buck, where King Bezos and his government cronies struck down joy wherever they found it, where pleasure was scarce and sanctuary was scarcer. But for one day at Denny Blaine, we could build a new world.
Fantastic, Max. Thank you so much for sharing that and for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Jared. I'm so incredibly psyched. I'm a longtime listener of the pod, so
fantastic,
really excited.
Even better. Well, I'm super excited to talk to you. I love this piece. I'm super excited for your collection that's coming out in 2025, fall 2025. Congratulations, I think is in order.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it still feels really surreal, but I'm just over the moon excited.
Yeah,
no pun intended.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, so that piece you read from today is set in Seattle, which isn't particularly surprising since you spent about 10 years living there before moving out east for your MFA. I get the sense from the bit we've talked and from the work of yours that I've read that Seattle holds a special place in your heart. So tell us about the city and what it is about the place that you find so inspiring to your writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I lived in Seattle for 10 years. I got there in 2011 to go to college. And I was so excited to go to, quote unquote, a real city. I grew up in kind of the suburbs of Los Angeles, and I had gone to an all-girls Catholic school, actually, which, as at the time, out as like a Jewish lesbian, that was a challenging thing. And so when I got to Seattle, I just had pinned so many sort of uh, dreams and aspirations onto the city in terms of like, this is going to be like queer utopia. And all the things socially that I couldn't get when I was living in Thousand Oaks, when I was at Catholic school. Seattle is going to deliver that for me. And in a lot of ways it did. I was out as a lesbian through college, and then I came out as trans towards the end of my college experience. Shortly after that, I met Gabby, who I would later marry, and we're still together. It's been about, 5 or 6 years now. So many wonderful things and so many wonderful friends are there. And with Denny Blaine, it's a real place. Of course, this beloved sort of queer gathering space. With writing that story, I wrote that story. It was one of the first stories I wrote for the collection, and I was really just trying to sort of preserve the like beautiful memories I had at Denny Blaine, and I was missing it so much, and I wanted to be back there. But as I continued to write about Seattle, I was able to start exploring some of the things that had felt disappointing about Seattle, and sort of the ways that, in all my 18-year-old idealism, was hoping that the city itself could deliver for me in terms of, I don't know, some kind of like ideal in terms of politics, community, dating, all these kinds of things that I think the collection is kind of trying to grapple with. What was I disappointed about that seems at all reasonable and makes sense, and what is sort of a product of this sort of idealist, unreasonable expectation for just living in a city to deliver the kind of life that I wanted to lead.
I was curious about the idea of like mining your own experience for fiction, because these stories are fiction, but you lived in Seattle. The book is based in the 2010s, which is around the time you were living there. Like you said, this place that you wrote about in this story is a real place. So I imagine you're pulling from some experiences. You're pulling from that feeling of disappointment that you had. I'm curious about your process and how you pick and choose what to use from your actual lived experience for your fiction, and where you draw a line, and how that changes throughout the process of writing a story.
Yeah, it's I'm a really big autofiction fan, and I would situate my work adjacent to the autofiction tradition. I don't, my characters are not all named Max Delsohn, but
Yeah.
they are trans guys who are 20 something white Jewish guys for the most part that are running around and trying to figure stuff out. And I think because Seattle, all of the stories take place in Seattle or near Seattle in the collection. So that's the premise that I was operating under. And so I often started with place for a lot of these stories. For Denny Blaine, I really just wanted to be back there. And you can only really write, in that story, I really let myself wax poetic about the landscape for a while. But at a certain point, you need characters
Yeah.
or something's got to happen. And that stuff is, that is typically fictionalized quite a bit. I originally, I sort of came to creative writing in general through creative nonfiction and writing essays. And something that I really love about fiction, and part of why I think I've invested in the genre of fiction in a way I haven't invested in other genres of writing, is because I have the space to invent. Because at a certain point, I just found writing about exactly what happened to me super boring and sort of limiting in what I wanted to say. And it's something it's sort of strange. I felt like through fiction I was able to say something truer with fiction, that the limitations of creative nonfiction, where you're writing about exactly what happened, actually kind of limit sort of this, I don't know, more amorphous sort of truth that I'm chasing after, I guess.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is your process, because before the interview, you told me that your writing process is very pleasure forward. And I'm curious to hear you talk about that and what you do to put yourself in the headspace to really enjoy the writing process.
Yeah, I feel like in my time in the Syracuse MFA, I've gotten sort of especially radical about this. In my first year of the MFA, I tried to write a novel that was I had sort of a workhorse mentality. And that works for a lot of people. And it works for a lot of people that I'm friends with and really respect as writers. I learned through trying to write that novel that it does not work for me. And I like to write every day, and I like to be working, and I think there were just like all these things that I was telling myself that like I had all this like sort of self-esteem work I did as part of having all this time and space and support in the MFA of like, you do like working on something when you're excited about something. And so what would it look like if you let yourself write when you feel like writing and take a break when you need to take a break? And I was so scared to even let myself do that for so long. I was so scared that I would take a week off and never write again. But what actually happened is I take a week off and then I'm like ready to go back to the page. And I think too, like now I'm working on a novel that I'm having a lot of fun writing, and I plan to keep working on it. And even in the moment of writing, the second I start to feel bored or stiff, I just stop. And I'm just like, what is like the have to voice saying right now, and how can I just not do that? And 9 times out of 10, I don't need to be writing that thing that I didn't want to be writing. I mean, my work, I do get a lot of pleasure out of it, even if I'm writing something, kind of dark and upsetting. I want to write something, I feel like I'm always checking in with myself. Like, would I sit down and read this and like really be like, wow, this rocks? Because there's so many writers and fiction writers and all kinds of writers where I'm like, gosh, I'm going to read that book again because it's just such a delight to read it. And you can just feel in the prose how much energy and just exuberance is there. And so there's like so many things. Like I'll I don't always do this, but sometimes I'll be like, I'm going to drink 3 cups of coffee. That's what I would like to do. I really just feel in the mood. Sometimes I will just like get a bunch of donuts and just have them on the table and just
I
be
like
like,
this process.
yeah. And it's like, it's silly. And I try to, I try to keep it silly and keep it light. That's another thing that like I've really had to like sort of work through, as I grow as a writer, is just like, with stuff like the donuts and the coffee and everything, I realize that it's a very cliche thing, but my inner critical voice is so incredibly loud, even on a first draft. And it's something that I know logically, like, this is actually not helpful when you're trying to have a perfect draft. I'm not the type of writer that needs to go like sentence by sentence, but because I do care about style and musicality and stuff, it's hard for me to remember that, to tolerate the messiness of the first draft.
Right.
Because I'm so attached to being able to be like, oh, look at my story that's like entertaining and interesting, but also like on the level of the line is really, really tight and sort of has that musical quality.
So you're saying bringing in these things like coffee, donuts, things that make you excited to write, those make that voice in your head less critical when drafting?
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to it's hard to take yourself too overly seriously if you've got a stack of donuts on the table, or if you're like, I am going to indulge myself. Usually I try to limit myself to 1 cup of coffee. But I make something I got really good at in the pandemic is I make really good pour over coffee. And I do all this really complicated stuff. So it's really quite difficult for me to limit myself. So I'm like 3 cups of coffee is deep. I'm caffeinated as all get out. And it's like, it's fine. Just keep writing the scene. You're having a great time. You'll worry about all the cleaning up style stuff later on.
And so then when you get to revision, are you like, no coffee, no donuts, critical voice, come here?
Yeah, I do have to say, and interestingly, I think part of the reason why I do this sort of like pleasure forward, especially with my first drafts, is because actually I would say the first drafts are like fairly often like my least favorite part of working on a project. I really, really love revision, and I need no plying. I need no sort of I'm always just like delighted to get in there with a piece of writing and just figure out how to really make it sing. That's what I really love, and what I really look forward to. And it's part of why it's been a sort of unique challenge to work on a novel that I plan to keep working on and that I'm excited about. Whereas the other one I tried to write, that was just like, doing the workhorse thing. I abandoned it after 20,000 words because I was just like, I hate doing this. The writing itself is bad. But with the novel, it's like, I just got to produce a bunch of words. And I really had to work on the first 50 pages of this novel are gorgeous. And I've had to really force myself to go beyond that, and just write it, because, yeah, if you keep just, tinkering like I like to do over and over, that's fun, but I'm not getting as far as quickly as I would like. So.
Right. Okay, well, speaking of joyful practices, when you were living in Seattle, you actually worked as a stand-up comedian for 5 years before applying to MFA programs. In what ways do you think that background in comedy has influenced your writing process and writing style?
Yeah, I, really loved doing stand-up when I was doing it. And I love stand-up as sort of, just the genre of stand-up. And all my classes that I teach for Syracuse are all about the rhetorics of stand-up comedy. So I think a lot about, what a good stand-up comedian does to draw us in. And what I really got sort of obsessive about, and I got a lot of pleasure out of being very obsessive about this, is just like it's not even like each word, it's almost like even breath when you're on stage. Like every little thing matters. The audience, you're up there with a spotlight. The audience is seeing every little thing that you do, every little moment, every little aspect of what you're doing up there is potential to bring them in, make them laugh. So I think that's part of why I take the line stuff so seriously. And I really hate to have a sentence that feels tonally off or sort of rhythmically off. Because I just feel like with stand up, you start with doing these short sets and then you build up to doing longer sets. And especially when you're first starting out, I only did 5 years is nothing in stand up world. I was a little tiny baby, in terms of being a stand up. So I spent a lot of time. You really need to prove yourself in 3 to 5 minute, 10-minute, whatever sets, 15. And those you have to crush the entire time if you want to make an impression, because there's, everybody's out there, everybody is grinding, not unlike literary writers in our way. So you really have to stand out, and you have to like really take it super seriously,
Right.
to get people to pay attention to you.
Okay, so you put in those 5 years. What made you want to turn your attention away from stand-up comedy to prose and look into MFA programs?
I actually, for my undergraduate degree, it was English/creative writing. So I always was interested in writing, and I didn't really see how I could study anything else. I didn't really feel interested in anything else. And then after college, I was like, okay, well, that was fun. Seems like I just get a job now. I don't know. There's all these memes about how you have an English major and now you work as a barista or whatever. So I did a bunch of, minimum wage work, for, about 5 years until I went to the MFA. And I did a reading, a literary reading, and I wrote like a very short essay, and I read it at this bar. And someone came up to me and was like, have you considered doing stand up? Like, this is and the piece was like, looking back, it just like me doing stand up kind of like, it wasn't, I'm not sure I would call it a literary piece looking back. But I was like, wow, that's cool. I've always enjoyed stand up, and I've always thought it was really cool. So I think just a person being like, you could do this, was enough to kind of get me on stage. And I think I did have like sort of a natural knack for it to a certain extent. And I had some friends who sort of started doing it around the same time as me. And it was a lot of fun. I think, there were several things right before I quit. I was starting to do festivals, which with stand-up festivals, you travel to different cities and you perform, and usually you're there to like network with the other comics. Usually there's like a headliner that's pretty famous. I did a festival in Boise that Maria Bamford was the headliner, for example. But there's also bookers and stuff. So like people who work at Comedy Central, The Tonight Show, shows in New York that are hard to get on. And I started doing, I had a summer where I did a few of those, and I was really like around these other people who were like mostly living in New York City, who were like doing like way more festivals than I was doing, who were, you know, getting the attention of the bookers. I was like much too much of a baby to have any business talking to them at that point. And I just sort of like realized, I remember walking around Minneapolis. I was doing the festival 10,000 Laughs, which is a really like hard to, it's a great festival. It's difficult to get into. And I was shocked that I even got into it. And I was walking around before my midnight show, just being like, I don't think I want to do this long term. And I think like a couple of the reasons why, as I look back, I'm very outgoing and friendly, but I'm ultimately an introvert and I need a bunch of time alone every day. And I also really am, now I always write in the mornings, and I'm sharpest in the mornings, and I don't really like to stay out late anymore. I've had some great late nights,
Yeah.
but with stand up, you have to be out every night. And another part of it is my wife, Gabby, is a elementary school teacher and works 9 to 5. So I very rarely saw her when I was doing stand up, and she would come to some of the shows, but some of the shows, not every stand up show is a smashing success, and going to a bad stand up show is tough on even the most supportive of partners. And then the other thing that I realized, and this was probably the more crucial thing that sort of indicated to me that I should should try to apply to MFAs at least, is I really loved writing jokes. Like that was what I loved to do. Like I loved just like tinkering with a joke. You know, you go on stage, you try it. Okay, I'll, that kind of hit. I'll go on stage in an hour at a different show and I'll change one word and I'll see if that works. Like I love that aspect, but I actually really kind of hated crowd work and riffing.
Yeah.
And I had like these friends who are amazing comedians, like so good, and they just liked that. And I realized like I was kind of white knuckling through like just being up there without a plan. And I was like, oh, like what if I just pursued writing, where and with literary stuff, you bring the paper up and you can just read off the paper. You don't have to just suddenly start making small talk if your story isn't doing well. I mean, maybe more people should do that, but like that's not really so when I realized that, when I was able to isolate that, what I loved is the writing of the jokes and not so much like the being up there and going out every night and the nightlife aspect. I was like, I want to be home with my partner and our weird dogs and just like mostly be alone in a room, like working on stuff. And that was when I was like, okay, I do think I'm going to try to do the MFA thing. And I'm very glad that it worked out.
Yeah. Well, before applying to and attending the MFA program at Syracuse, you actually spent a year at another MFA program. And I'm curious to hear you talk about the experience of changing programs, because I think for many people, it doesn't even cross their mind that that's an option. So what would you say you learned from that experience, and what advice do you have for listeners who may be considering a change?
I don't know that you have to do it the way that I did it necessarily. I didn't tell anyone at my program at the time that I was applying out, which was very busy. Trying to do an MFA and applying again for programs is it's a lot of work. And I think I probably could have talked to the faculty at my previous program. Like I actually think it seemed like a bigger deal in my head. This is a thing that people do, absolutely. And, I was very forthcoming. Gosh, I'm trying to even remember. I think it must have been my statement of purpose to Syracuse. I said that I was already at a program, and that didn't, hurt my chances as far as I know. That didn't, That was never something that was really discussed in a meaningful way. When I got the call that I got into Syracuse, my professor, Dana Spioto, was like, "You're at his program right now, right?" And I was like, "Yes." So it wasn't like an issue. And when I left Ohio State, I was so nervous about telling the faculty, and they were really, really nice. And totally supportive. Part of it for me was I went to Ohio State to study creative nonfiction. And I sort of had this realization that what I really wanted to do was write fiction. I took a fiction workshop at Ohio State and loved it. And I realized that the reason why I wasn't writing fiction was just I had all these like weird sort of like voices in my head telling me that I couldn't, or that like I wasn't smart enough, or something, like I don't even know, just some kind of negative self-talk that something that I think is such a luxury of the MFA is just all the time away from having to worry about, work. That was definitely it for me. I had been working full time, minimum wage since college, and I felt like I had all this time and was able to get in touch with things that I wanted and thought that I wasn't able to do when I was, working 40 hours a week between like 3 different doorman jobs, Uh, so I was changing my concentration, which I think I felt like it was easier for me to talk about it, I guess, to other people, because I was like, oh, I'm going to go to this other school for fiction because I came to Ohio State because I was excited about working with these particular nonfiction professors specifically, and the fiction faculty at Ohio State is amazing. But I was like, now that I'm kind of, getting a sense of like what, I'm sort of interested in as a fiction writer, I'm just going to see what else is out there. And the other thing is my partner and I were not super happy in Columbus. And that was part of it too. So we sort of made the list of places to apply together. My partner is very, very attached to nature, and especially like trees and water. And it was very challenging for both of us, having come from Seattle, where there's all this natural beauty, to go to Ohio, where it's just a totally different landscape. And so when I got into Syracuse, that first summer we were there was just we came in the summer before my program started, and we were just like immediately like kayaking, just like hiking in the deep woods of where I'm not even that into that stuff, but it was like after being in Ohio and not having it and taking it for granted in Seattle, it was so yeah, like the location was a big part of it too.
Well, let's talk about Syracuse a bit. The MFA program there, it's a 3-year fully funded program with tracks in fiction and poetry. They accept 6 students in fiction and 6 students in poetry each year. So it's a pretty selective program. You told me before the interview that you have very strong opinions about how best to approach one's time in an MFA program. Having come from another program and getting the chance to start over, so to speak, at Syracuse, what was your approach and what advice do you have for listeners on this?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like it's the worst now that I'm a third year. I'm just constantly like doling out. We had some new admits come last week, and I was like, oh, this is my time. I'm just going to be the old man in the corner giving MFA advice. I think something that I was just telling an admit last week, in fact, but it's something that I've told people often who are thinking of applying to an MFA is, I think, perhaps you're not in the place to have a very clear sort of thing that you want to get out of the MFA. But I think as much as possible, if you can kind of articulate to yourself what you're hoping to get out of the MFA, and that doesn't have to be, there's not like one thing, for every person. It's different for everybody. But I do think, trying to identify, and maybe it's an amorphous thing. Maybe it's like, I want more writing community. Maybe it's something really concrete. Like, I want this particular agent, and I want this agent to sign me on this date in history. Like whatever it is, I really think it's key to identify that and then sort of go into a MFA program a little bit defensively, a little bit like, I'm going to protect this time. I think there's so many ways that programs and also like moving to a new place and just, sort of the heady rush of, being like, oh, I'm a real writer. And that's how it felt for me. I was like, this is my big validating thing, is getting into this program. I think it's really easy to sort of get distracted. And, you're also part of a university. So there's, people like, hey, do you want to do this thing? Do you want to come to this thing? And just like, you don't have to be like ridiculously militant or anything, but just think about like, is this something that I actually want to do? First and foremost, and then, sort of like secondarily, like, is this kind of serving what I'm hoping to accomplish here? Something that was really important to me was like, I need to make sure that like I am in a good space when I wake up in the morning. I don't want to be like out super late, like hungover when I used to drink or whatever. I really want to protect those morning hours. And, similarly for Lit Mag stuff, Salt Hill is lovely, and the people who run it are lovely, and I was part of it for a little while, but I knew I didn't want to take too big of a role, because that was not where my interests lie. There are several people in my program who are really passionate about lit mags and working as an editor and sort of that whole sort of community and industry. And I think it's really important to know that about yourself. So when somebody's like, hey, do you want to take this role on at the Lit Mag? You can be like, yes, I really care, because I really care about this. Or like, no, this isn't something I really want to put energy towards, because that's not really what I'm interested in, rather than just being like, sure, why not? Because I think that's sometimes when people sort of just are like, yeah, I guess, that can sometimes be, I think, where people feel a little bit regretful that they weren't clear on why they signed up for something.
So going into your time at Syracuse, it sounds like you were careful not to like overextend yourself. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what it was like protecting that time, but then also creating that community and creating those relationships with people in the program.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was really, I love a party, and I go to a lot of parties for the MFA, and I like to think I make a pretty good showing at these. I also, since I've been in the program, I've hosted a gay movie night, which is just a monthly movie night at my house where the queer students in the program are invited, and we watch a movie that is either has gay stuff in it or you have a gay relationship to it. So really whatever. But so I'm really big on community. And I think I think I knew, part of the benefit of, I was actually, of the six of us in my fiction cohort, I'm the oldest. And I think like, I feel really aware of that. And so I think about it a lot. And I think one of the benefits of being a little older is that I kind of know that I am the type of person who will just go overboard with the community stuff and just like overschedule myself. And it's part of like with stand up, I was going out every night and then, trying to work full time. I was just exhausted. So I really like when someone asked me to do something, I really just like full body scan, like, how do you feel right now? Did you go out last night? Is there going to be food there? Like these kinds of things. And I think it's because I am a person who I'm very eager to make connections. So my work for myself was more like, you don't need to go to everything. Whereas I think there are other people that I'm friends with in my program even now who are like, it's hard for me to go and do that. And so I feel like often challenging themselves to go to X event or hang out with X group. And it's just, yeah. So I think, really like the morning hours, and also just like not, sort of knee jerk saying yes to every party, even though I kind of want to.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, that sounds fun, and like, more fun than going to bed early. Workshop isn't required every semester at Syracuse, which was different. At Ohio State, I believe workshop was required every semester. So this, and I haven't always taken workshop, and I did find when I didn't have like deadlines of work, it was a little harder to sort of be like, okay, protect that time. I really like in a lot of ways I build my MFA days around that that morning chunk of writing, and then everything else I try my best to keep secondary, to varying results depending on the day.
Well, I also want to talk a bit about building relationships with professors, because the faculty at Syracuse is a big draw. They have some great writers that are working there, including a couple of my favorites, Mary Karr and George Saunders. What's it been like working with the faculty at Syracuse? Do you feel like you've gotten some mentorship and able to like foster some good relationships with the faculty there?
Yeah, absolutely. I keep joking to my friends. I'm getting ready to go on the Syracuse MFA propaganda tour, because I just like I can't. I was so overwhelmed and just I've been so happy with the faculty relationships. And yeah, I mean it's a school where you've got some of the big names, and it's a little intimidating. But everyone has been so incredibly supportive, and I couldn't believe just the sort of extent of like the generosity and just like really being in it with me, particularly the fiction faculty and everyone on the fiction faculty, including George. Especially when I was querying and on submission, which was I believe I'm the only one in the program with an agent right now, and it was a little bit of an isolating experience among the other students in the program, of course. So it was just like incredible to feel like I could talk to the faculty so often about industry stuff, but also craft stuff, and just like it was just like very human, just like lovely conversations where I didn't feel it just felt really like they genuinely want me to succeed. And yeah, and then it's like I've read all their books and I think they're all brilliant. I mean, like it's really like an embarrassment of riches, the faculty. So yeah, it's totally a dream, and people are like, "Oh, you go to Syracuse, isn't that so cool?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
There is.
Have to say.
So, what have been some of your favorite classes that you've taken at Syracuse?
Oh man. I really have I'm auditing a class right now, even though I don't need to take any classes, just because I love the classes so much. I really love workshop. I just like I mean, and now that it's like, I did a year at Ohio State, did 3 years at Syracuse, 4 years at MFA. Now I'm like, maybe I have had enough workshop. But throughout my time in the program, I've loved workshop. I just like I love the like, I mean, it's high stakes compared to, some of the other classes where you're not like sharing work. And I think it makes I mean, I've just like there's been so many workshop submissions in my time at Syracuse that have just like blown me away. Like I really think like a lot of times it's just like people are really taking workshops seriously. The teachers are really taking workshops seriously, and it's just like a super energizing, sort of like delightfully challenging environment. And then the forms classes are also amazing. I've read so many of what are now my favorite books that I had not read. I had never read, for example, Milkman by Anna Burns, which is a Grey Wolf book. Not to brag, but Chanel Ben's forms class that I took in my fall first year. I had never read it, and I read it and I was like, this is everything I've ever wanted in a novel, basically. So yeah, I mean, it's just I've taken so many classes, and I've taken classes on the English PhD side too. I took a critical theory class, and it was really hard, but I love that as well, I guess. And it's like, it's a community space. I love that stuff. So yeah.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, Syracuse is a fully funded program, meaning every student gets tuition remission and a stipend. If the website is correct, the stipend at Syracuse is $20,000 per year. At Syracuse, students must teach in exchange for the funding, but it seems you only teach in your second and third year in the program. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we during my time in the program, we formed a graduate student union, graduate student worker union, which is so cool. So we have actually won for next year, $24K.
All right.
Which was a long bargaining process. And yeah, the union is so cool, and I'm so excited that came together. So yes, $24K. tuition remission. You do not have to teach in your first year. It's a fellowship year. I took 4 classes in fall, and then I think I took 3 in the spring. And I took 1 PhD class in each of those. So I was very busy.
That's your first year.
That's all my first year, yeah. And it's fairly common to take 4 classes in your fall first year. Not everybody does it, but 4 classes is
It's a lot.
intense. You're doing so the way that the Syracuse program does a workshop is you have your cohort workshop, which is just you and the 5 other people that have been admitted for your year and your genre. You do that every fall, just the 6 of you and one of the faculty. And then spring, you do open workshop, which is just anyone can take it in any year, in any genre. In second year, you teach comp, basically. So fall, you teach 2 sections of 105. And then in the spring, you teach 1 section of 205, which is sort of like 105 is like very, very sort of like academic writing 101, very early sort of like what do you notice kind of like basic like visual analysis type stuff. And then 205 is sort of like similar, but it's a little bit more based on academic research. And so there's a little bit, I found there was like a little bit more planning and stuff that you have to do for 205, which I think is why they give you 2 sections of 105 in the fall. It felt a little bit more manageable to plan for those. And then third year is when you get to teach in the English department. So you do 1 section of something in the English department each semester. So I did fiction. I did fiction workshop this past fall for my third year. And then right now I'm teaching a class called Living Writers, which is it's based around our visiting writers series. So we have the undergrads read the book of whatever writer is coming to do their reading and talk. And we just sort of talk about it, and the assignments are based on that.
And you felt like that workload was pretty manageable. It sounds like they've staggered it in a way where you have like, there's just 1 semester in which you're teaching 2 classes. Otherwise, it's in the second and third year, 1 class per semester. So it's a lighter workload than some programs, but that felt pretty manageable to you.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I had never taught before. My wife is an elementary school teacher, and she's really passionate about it. But I didn't know if I would like it. I was really nervous about it, actually. And now I'm totally teacher pilled. I'm like, I love teaching. I hope to teach creative writing going forward for a long time. I just like I get so much out of it, and I it's just like a very joyful experience. And for honestly, I mean, I wrote so much of my collection in my second year, and I was busy. I was, it's definitely like an adjustment going from the fellowship year to the second year where you're teaching 2 classes in the fall, and then you're also taking one of those classes that sort of like teach you how to teach, more or less. But like, it didn't keep me from writing what like some of the best stories I've written, I think, were in my second year. And I think like, it's enough where you feel like a little bit of pressure on your schedule, but not so much that you're like not writing. That was not my experience personally. And I think, not everybody likes teaching as much as I do, for sure. So, your mileage may vary there, but I do think for the most part, it's pretty manageable for people. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that when you moved to Syracuse, you were really excited about living there. I'm curious to hear anything else you want to tell us about living in Syracuse. And also, I'm curious just to hear whether you feel like that $24,000 a year is like sufficient to live comfortably in Syracuse.
Yeah. I mean, when I came into the program, I believe the stipend was $17,500. So it's been this is a big jump from when I started. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I have a partner who's teaching elementary school full time, which is not a super high paying position, but the joint income is meaningful. I think not everybody works in the summer and or part-time during the year, but several people do. I think for me, coming from Seattle, the cost of living is so high there, and the rent is really, really high in Seattle now. So that was awesome. Like, I did feel like the rent And for me, like my partner and I, we don't even live like in the university district, and we don't have roommates. So I think it does depend. I mean, you can get a room like for pretty cheap here if you have roommates, if you're willing to do that. And a lot of people here do. So yeah, and I mean, Syracuse itself, it's not like there's not a ton of like nightlife, and part of the reason why I started the gay movie night is because the queer scene and I mean the trans scene is very very minimal in Syracuse, and that's been really hard, especially for you know I'm so into community stuff, and especially queer and especially trans community. So it is an adjustment, and it's really hard, But I will say, there's so many amazing queer and trans writers that I've met in the program. Again, it feels like an embarrassment of riches, just like these incredible writers that I just like cannot wait to publish their first stories, because I just really think they're brilliant. And so it's nice that I feel like at least in the program there definitely is some queer and trans writers who are holding it down with me. But yeah, the natural beauty is big here. I got really into birds when I moved here. I just I literally, my wife and I will wake up at like 5 a.m. and drive an hour to this like bird preserve and just look at birds. It's ridiculous. I'm like, when I was 20, I was like doing Molly 72 hours awake. Like, it's just like, I'm looking at like a barn swallow. Like, what is this? But I love it. I'm so into it. So,
That's fantastic.
that's the kind of thing, Syracuse. And like, I talked to my neighbor and he's like, oh, I had a cedar waxwing in my yard the other day. And he's like 90 years old. And I'm like, oh my God, Matt, that's so cool. Like, I saw red-winged blackbird today. Like, so it's like, the last thing I'll say that I really, really love about Syracuse is the pace of life is so much slower, and I just like didn't even really that's like not a thing I had ever thought about until I had like come to an MFA program. And in Ohio it was really different because it was 2020 and everything was remote, so it was hard to sort of tell what the pace was like. I was just like in my house on the computer in a new place. It for me, like having that extra time and not worrying about commuting or going to everybody's art shows or comedy shows or readings like every night. Like, that's just not the way that Syracuse culture works. And it's like really, for me, was like very restorative and generative ultimately for me as a writer. So I really value that about my time here for sure.
And I imagine it makes it a little easier to protect that writing time you were talking about.
Yes, there's no early morning raves that are just like, oh my gosh, if I miss this, I'll be culturally irrelevant forever. No, I'm very, it hasn't been too much of a struggle to protect those precious morning hours.
Well, Max, this has been awesome. So much fun talking to you. Before you go, I want to ask you one last question. What is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's a little corny maybe. I just like sort of assumed that I like had no business like applying to MFAs for so long. So when I actually did, and when I got into Syracuse, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I'm so scared. Like, I was scared. Like, I was like, I'm out of my depth. I'm gonna be like, and it's exciting to feel like, oh, everyone's gonna be like, so much smarter than me. And often that's been true. And like, I was so intimidated by the professors and all how accomplished they are in these books that I've loved and just have like done so much for me. And just like for the most part, people are just like lovely and like ready to connect, and really just like, the faculty they're just like super down to earth and are ready to be like, I am a teacher. I am here to help you. Let me share my wealth of information and my resources, and I'm going to help you sort of succeed. And people in workshop, they read your story and they really have like, they wrote like a page single spaced of like how to make it better. And it's just like really brilliant, really generous feedback. And it was just kind of beyond my wildest dreams to just like have that sort of sustained, rigorous attention on my work. And I really think the ways that I've improved because of the Syracuse program are just like impossible to even begin to put language to. So yeah, just I guess in short, I didn't realize it would be so awesome. Not to be like the propaganda tour, but it was the best. It's been the best.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. I'm really glad you've had a good experience, and I'm really glad you took some time to stop by and talk to me, because this has been a lot of fun. Listeners should be on the lookout for your debut collection, Crawl, which comes out in fall 2025 from Grey Wolf Press. Again, thanks so much for coming by.
Oh, thank you so much, Jared. This was just like, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much.